Thank you, Dr. Freeman. I appreciate that.
You got it.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you this evening to the Board of Finance Budget Public Meeting Hearing for Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. We have only 2 items on the agenda tonight. No surprise. And I wanted to just provide some, some backup and some background to tonight's meeting so we know what the format is going to be. Again, I'd like to welcome all of you. This meeting is going to basically include presentations regarding the town budget and the Board of Education budget. We are going to be having public forum. The public forum will be at the opportunity for the public to have the opportunity to address the Board of Finance and comment on the proposed budgets as presented this evening. As we are again in a completely virtual meeting setting this year, and hopefully for some of us it will be the last and we could get back in person next budget season. Everyone currently has been placed on mute to limit any unintended noise during the presentations. When the presentations are completed and speaking opportunities arise, we will individually unmute those who wish to ask questions or comment, but ask that members of the public, should they want to speak, use the raise hand function to identify themselves, and I'll go over that in a little bit more on that shortly. Before we begin the presentations, opening remarks and want to give an overview of tonight's format. I do want to thank, on behalf of the Board of Finance, all of the boards, department heads, commissions, town school administrators, and staff, and hundreds of volunteers, as we all know, who serve on these boards and commissions, who worked in the budget since the fall of 2021. If you are in attendance this evening virtually, or will be watching at home at a later time, we want to thank you for tuning in. And as this hearing is focused on you, we want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to provide comment. We strive for this meeting and have been over the many years to assist the public in educating and informing our community and taxpayers on what is contained in the budgets, how your money is being spent, and how the budgets are going to affect all of our bottom lines. For several months, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education have been developing these budgets. And in addition, you are most likely going to hear several times, whether it's tonight or on Thursday night, that the Board of Finance has been part of several of these meetings and workshops with both boards since November. The presentations we're about to hear were presented already to the Board of Finance at our last regular meeting on February 17th, and we are very aware of the content of these budgets. However, we are going to have a chance during our Thursday night budget workshops to drill down into details of these budgets as a board, as needed, before we move a budget forward to the Guilford voters, to town meeting, and then referendum. Our format tonight is going to be as follows. We will have a presentation of the proposed Board of Education fiscal year 2022-23 budget by Superintendent Dr. Paul Freeman and Board of Education Chairwoman Dr. Katie Balistraci. Upon completion of the presentation, we will allow the public in attendance to ask questions by raising their virtual hand. When unmuted, please state your name, your address, and be as clear and concise as you can with your question. If there are minimal public questions, I will entertain the Board of Finance members to ask questions as well, but it should be noted to all of my colleagues on the board that we will have plenty of time on Thursday during our workshop to ask questions of both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. Following the presentation of the Board of Education, we'll have a presentation of the proposed town fiscal year 22-23 budget and revenue projections by First Selectman Matt Hoey. Upon completion of the town presentation, we will follow the same format as noted earlier for public questions. After both presentations have been made and a Q&A period is complete, I will go ahead and recap the night and set the stage for our workshop deliberations on Thursday night. Finally, after I do that synopsis of what we heard, I will go ahead and ask for public forum to allow members of the public to address the Board of Finance regarding the budgets presented. All speakers, again, please state your name, address, and please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. That being said, the Board of Finance really is in a listening mode this evening, as well as the public. So we don't do too much talking, at least I don't. I like to hand the floor over during these hearings to the appropriate speakers. So at this point, I'd like to hand the virtual floor over to Dr. Freeman and Dr. Balistraci for the presentation of the Board of Education budget for fiscal year 22 and 23.
Thank you so much. And certainly thank you to the public for being here and being engaged. We hope to provide you with answers to your questions. In January, Dr. Freeman brought to the Board of Education a proposed budget for the academic 2022-2023 year that reflected the administration's assessment of needs and priorities, essentially, for the 2022-23 year. That included obviously maintaining and continuing to strive for excellence in education, but also paying really close attention to the mental health needs of our students, which has been a priority for a number of years and has only increased with the pandemic. We are in a process of continually making sure that we are providing our students both with the instructional and mental health supports that they need moving forward. That budget that was brought to us at the beginning of January was represented a 5.9% increase. We are experiencing, and you'll hear that the town is likewise experiencing, a pretty big impact on our budgets by an increase in medical benefit costs for the coming year. So that's representing for the Board of Ed 2.4% of our budget as we bring this forward. We looked carefully at this budget. Dr. Freeman presented us with a number of really important considerations in terms of approaches to staffing for our, again, mental health needs. We have an ESSER funds that are covering a number of really important work that we're doing with our students. We have a couple of, for instance, social workers on those ESSER grants. So one of the things that this budget includes is taking one of those social workers, keeping them in our schools, but taking one of them off the ESSER grant and putting in the budget, because we want to be thoughtful not only for the coming academic year, but for the next few academic years, to make sure that we're able to sustain the supports that we've been able to build. The focus of the board really, as we reviewed this budget, was on making sure that we could maintain those supports. So we focused some cuts in areas that were mostly non-staffing related, and again, really tried to maintain what we think is a really important budget in terms of the supports for our students. After deliberation, after 2 public comments at the end of January, after meeting with the Board of Finance twice, meeting with our district leadership team, and deliberation at several meetings, we are now, or have brought to the Board of Finance, a budget that represents a 5.18% increase. We recognize that this is larger than any budget we've brought, certainly in my 10-year tenure. Again, recognize that we have cost drivers out of our control right now, the 2.4% medical benefit increase being one of them. but made this decision carefully with some information from the Board of Selectmen about a grand list that could um, help really ease the burden of what this budget might otherwise bring. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Freeman. He's going to go into some detail about the kind of the important pieces of this budget and let him describe to you what we want to bring forth for the 22-23 academic year.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci, and I'll share a few slides just to illustrate the detail that I'm going to add to the budget. So I just want to remind the community, without reading these slides to you, I just do want to remind the community that every budget process begins with the established goals and initiatives, the priorities and initiatives for each school year. These are the Board of Education approved priorities and initiatives for the 21-22 school year. The priorities, we are really proud of the fact, have remained relatively stable over the last several years, while the initiatives are specific and focused areas that do change annually, year to year, as we move forward. You will see as you look at these priorities and these initiatives that we're focused on the emotional environment, the social and emotional environment that we create in the schools. We're focused on the professional support for teachers that we offer in the schools, because when we have a sound emotional and professional environment in the schools, then the teachers are capable of creating the rigorous academic environments in every classroom that are the heart of our program. You will see that specific initiatives this year continue to focus on health and hygiene protocols. At the same time, we blend in an accelerated approach to instruction to help our students continue to move through and hopefully out of this pandemic, focused on their academic achievements and progress. And finally, a continued focus on the culture and the instructional practices in district that will foster social emotional wellness, equity, and social justice within our schools. Additionally, every year, each budget is built upon a set of budget assumptions. We do not make any financial decision. We do not make any budgetary request without first ensuring that every single request, every dollar that goes into this budget is focused on a safe and healthy environment, is focused on instruction and learning, extends and improves opportunities for all students. We have no intention of treading water or ever moving backwards in our progress, and that we are thoughtful and creative in utilizing personnel and other resources so that before we ask for a new investment, we've looked at the existing investment that is current in the school district. Each year, the budget is built around a projection of enrollment. We only plan for the students that we expect to see in front of us year to year. And next year, as we have over the last several years, we are projecting a modest decline in student enrollment. We are projecting to see a reduction overall in the district of about 46 students. I will say that each year when we make the predictions at this time, they tend to be a little bit smaller. We continue to decline, but the declines are small. The declines in enrollment that we have been experiencing are not to the level or to the degree that was projected some years ago. And that brings us to then the budget request that we make this year. The budget that is proposed and requested for the 22-23 upcoming school year, therefore, for the Guilford Public Schools stands at $65,629,734. This is an increase over the current fiscal year of $3,233,834, or as Dr. Balistraci just noted, it is an increase year over year of 5.18%. To put that in context, and again, as Dr. Balistraci said, this is a significant increase compared to past years. The community and the board will notice that for the last 6 years, we have been coming in with increases under 2%, some years significantly under 2%. In 3 of those last 6 years, the Board of Education budgets have come in below the cost of living adjustment. We're proud of this work. But we also recognize that this year there were circumstances that did not allow us to come in with a budget in alignment with these items. Again, as Dr. Balistraci noted, and as you will hear me reiterate several times, and I know that you'll hear from the town as well, the single most important driving factor in this budget, the single cost increase of most significance, is the increase to our medical benefits. I noted that the total budget is increasing by $3.2 million. Our medical benefits alone are increasing by $1.4 million. The proposed, were our medical benefits flat, this $3.2 million increase would only be a $1.7 million increase. Were it not for the medical cost, we'd be here tonight discussing a 2.8% increase. We would not be discussing a 5.18% increase. Now, all that said, I also want to point out, however, that our medical experience continues to be positive. Even with that significant year-over-year increase, we will not be spending the amount that we spent on medical benefits in school year 16-17. This Board of Education has renegotiated all of our employment contracts with all bargaining units. In each of those renegotiations, we have shifted our medical benefits, and we've seen real improvement on medical spending. From 16-17, we went down from 10.2 million to a low of 8.5 million. Now, this year, for a number of reasons, most significantly because of our experience, simply because of the cost of medical benefits for our actual employees and their families, we're seeing a significant bounce back. But we're not giving up all the gains that we have made in these last several years. We are giving up a significant portion of them, and it is that increase alone that is driving this budget. That is the real story of the budget that we share with the community tonight. It's not the only story, however. Every year we try to take some time to note efficiencies, to point out the areas of success in the budget of which we're proud. We have worked long and hard over the last several years to continue to bring special education services into the school district rather than sending students out into outplacements. We are very proud of the work that we have done with outplaced tuition. We would rather be investing those dollars into our local system than sending them out to private or to schools in other parts of the state. And as I'll show you in the next slide, we've gone a long way to being more predictable in those costs, while at the same time providing better service to our students locally. This budget does include some projected salary retirement savings. We are projecting that we will be able to lower costs in at least 2 areas where more veteran staff members are retiring out, and we are able to replace those staff members with less experienced, therefore individuals who are lower on the salary scale. This is a conservative projection. School districts across the state and across the country are experiencing labor shortages, and there is a burgeoning teacher shortage that we are experiencing. So while this is a relatively conservative projection, we do anticipate some savings here. Also, and I'll talk about this a little bit more with one of our proposed new positions, every time that we ask for something new, we look at restructuring existing positions. We try to find ways to get more value out of each position that we bring into the district by restructuring, and I will talk about that a little bit later. And then I need to continue to give credit to our teachers and to our principals who work diligently to keep costs down at the building and classroom level. The only word that I can use is frugal when I talk about the management of supplies and materials at the building and at the classroom level. As I mentioned with special education, this visual shows both the budgeted special education expenditures each year in the blue line and the actual special education expenditures as depicted in the red line. What we are proud of is we are proud of the fact that those 2 lines begin to converge to the right of this chart, that we have consistently worked to increase special education funding, as you'll see in 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, to bring it to the level that it needs to be to meet the needs of our students. But we have also begun to make the actual spend more predictable. We have done that in large part by increasing the staffing again at the local district level and reducing the numbers of times that we send students out of district for service, but provide those services in district instead. As I mentioned before, the story of this budget is predominantly about the cost drivers, and I want to break those out again just a little bit. That medical increase that we mentioned, a $1.4 million increase in the medical benefit by itself. When we add other insurance and benefit costs in there, particularly the other post-employment benefits, that cost increase goes to 1.6 million. Salaries, and these are salaries excluding proposed new positions that I'll detail in just a minute, but salaries as related to our existing employees, continuing to offer the service at the level that we currently offer it, is the second largest cost driver. And that is a first in the 12 budgets that I have shared with this community. Salary increases every year is the single largest cost driver in our budgets. We are a people-intensive business. 60%, 65% of our budget every year goes into the salaries for the people who work in the buildings with our children. Teachers, administrators, custodians, nurses, aides, lunch workers, the clerical positions, the money goes into the positions. This year, because of that medical increase, you see that that individual item actually rises above the salary increase for the first time that I've seen in 12 budgets preps that we've done here. Additionally, there are a number of other items that, while small individually, because of cost increases globally, have added up in areas like transportation contract, fuel costs, a cyber liability insurance policy that we are both required but also recognize as important to have in district, legal expenses, and a new requirement at the state level that we cover incurred school lunch debt. Those items together, those 7 items represent an increase of $2.8 million. And again, the entire budget is only going up by $3.2 million. And of the 2.8, again, we just have to continue to emphasize 1.6 is bundled into those benefit increases. There are, as Dr. Balistraci and I both mentioned, however, also investments that come into this budget. And I want to take a moment to name why we are investing in a budget that we have both been at some pains to identify as the single largest increase in either of our tenures here in Guilford. The reason is our students need these investments. We recognize that in normal budgeting, when costs go up, you offset those costs by reducing your spending. There is a school of budgeting that would say that if our non-discretionary costs are increasing, then we need to cut services to stay within an expected budget. But we are here to represent the Board of Education and the schools of Guilford Public Schools. We're here tonight proposing a budget that meets the needs of the children who attend the Guilford Public Schools. This was not the year to reduce service to students. We are in our 3rd consecutive year of schooling that has been impacted by this pandemic, each year in a different way, but each year compounding that impact. This budget continues to invest in the needs of the students. Every item that you see on this slide is driven either by a state mandate, by a pandemic exacerbated need, or by legitimate, honest, sincere, and repeated requests that we received from the community through our budget process this year, and quite honestly, over a number of years. At the high school next year, for the graduating class of 2023, the state of Connecticut will be implementing a new college requirement, a mastery-based requirement, which will require every graduating senior to accumulate 1 credit before their graduation in a performance-based or mastery-based exhibition of the skills and competencies that they have developed over their 13 years in the Guilford Public Schools. While we are still listening to feedback from students and from parents, and while we are still designing exactly what that performance and what that exhibit of mastery will entail and how it will be structured, we know that there will be a cost associated with it. With approximately 300 students in both the junior and senior classes, we anticipate that the cost associated with this, that the required teacher support associated with this, is going to be 2.4 FTEs, approximately 2.5 full-time positions. And so you see here the cost associated with those 2.5 positions to support our students as they are meeting that new graduation requirement. This budget also includes a classroom teacher at Cox Elementary School that is directly related to enrollment. At Cox this year, we will be advancing a 4th grade class to Baldwin that currently only has 2 sections, 2 classrooms of 4th grade at Cox this year. We anticipate an incoming class of 3 full kindergartens this year. So we either increase class sizes across Cox or we add a classroom position. This budget adds the classroom position. As Dr. Balistraci noted, currently this year under the ESSER grant that has been provided to us in response to pandemic needs through the federal government, we're currently carrying 2 social workers and an English language learner teacher within that grant. That grant sunsets at the end of next school year. This social work position, while already in district, is here tonight because we're looking to shift this position out of the grant funding and into our regular operational funding to soften the impact at the end of next year when the grant sunsets. Next year, we will be forced to look at the second social work position and the English language position and determine whether or not we allow those positions to be eliminated from Guilford schools or whether we move those 2 positions into next year's budget proposal. This budget includes the increase of 1 special education teaching position because we've seen an increase in identified special education students with special educational needs rather, at both Baldwin Middle School and Lakes Elementary School. This position would afford a half-time teaching position at each of those locations to support and to meet the needs of those newly identified students. This budget includes the addition of 1 additional instructional coach. Over the last 12 years, we've been slowly building our cohort of literacy and math coaches in the district. Coaches, instructional coaches in the system are full-time embedded professional developers. They're master teachers. They are teachers themselves who partner with classroom teachers to help them be more effective in the classroom. We have built up a cohort of literacy coaches. We now have literacy coaching support that goes from kindergarten through the high school. We have built up a cohort of math coaches. We currently have math coaching support that goes from kindergarten through the 8th grade at Adams. This position would allow us to bring coaching support in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and continue to support that math coaching support that already exists. By restructuring the existing team with this 1 addition, we'll provide this STEM coaching in grades K through 6 or K through 8, and we will also be able to bring math coaching to the high school for the first time. So again, looking creatively at the existing positions, we gain 2 benefits with this 1 add. Additionally, and while these are small numbers, we believe that these are important investments. This budget includes an additional assistant swim coach for the girls swim team at the high school level. The girls swim team continues to grow. While we have funded a head coach for some time, it's time to add an assistant coach. And this budget includes additional dollars for the rental of both ice time and pool time. In Guilford, we do not have either a swimming pool or an ice rink, and yet we support both swim teams and hockey teams. To a large degree, the cost of both the ice and the pool time has come out of parent pockets, checkbooks, donations. While this increase doesn't eliminate the needs for parents to make some of that contribution, it does recognize that, that we should be carrying more of that cost as a school district. All of the items on this slide represent an increase of $409,500, approximately 0.6%. So as we talk about the 5.18% increase, it's approximately 0.5% of new investment that is driving that increase. When I spoke a moment ago about reducing service to try to offset that cost, To bring this budget down to a 1.5 budget increase like we've seen in the past several years wouldn't just involve not making these new investments, it would have involved reducing existing services. And as I said, this is not a time to be entertaining a conversation about increasing class sizes or reducing teacher instructional support or reducing any program or service that we provide to our students after they have weathered these past 3 school years. Each year, I try to show what that investment page looks like when you look specifically at the staffing investments. And what I want to note here is that these investments all fall in one column. The investments that we're talking about making this year focus around the teacher-student relationship. They focus around the classroom dynamic. Now, that is not to say that administrative, paraclerical, custodial, and other supports in the district are unimportant. It is to say that we recognize the magnitude of this increase, and we have been thoughtful and critical and conservative in where we make those investments. The other note that I want to make about this slide is that in past years, even that teacher column itself has looked different. In past years, that teacher column has included some reductions and some additions. There's always been offsetting cuts when we have come forward with requested increases. That's not happening this year. And again, it's not happening because of 2 things that we've already noted. The last 6 years of budgets, we've really been working these past several years to bring in lean and responsible budgets, and the moment we find ourselves in now. We simply do not see that this is an opportunity to make reductions. Our students need the investments in the teacher column this year. To put that into a little more perspective, I've talked about how we've worked hard over these last several years. We have made teacher reductions in relation to the declining enrollment that we mentioned way back in one of the first slides. Over these last several years, we have reduced the number of elementary classroom teachers in the district, world language teachers at both the elementary and middle school level, PE, music, math, and significantly, we reduced the number of English language arts teachers in the school system 2 or 3 years ago by 6 full FTEs. All of those reductions have been in response to declining enrollment and to shifting and redesigning our focus of instruction over these last several years. At the same time, we have used those reductions to fund other investments. As I mentioned with that budget assumption slide, we don't just add new, but when we've made these reductions in certain enrollment related areas, at the same time, we've improved the offering. We've expanded the offerings in Guilford over these last several years. We now offer full day kindergarten. We've expanded the elementary art experience. We have increased the number of district-wide school psychologists and school social workers to meet students' social and emotional needs in the school setting. We have increased district-wide special education programs and teachers in the district. We have built up that cohort of full-time embedded professional developers, the instructional coaches that we mentioned. And in these last couple of years, we've added another type of coach, a technology integration specialist. Again, a master teacher who goes in and works with other teachers to help them better embed technology into their classroom instruction. The net of this over the last several years is that we are in fact down 10.5 teaching positions overall. We've reduced more than 10.5, but funded many of these investments. That is a net decrease of 10.5 teaching positions since school year 14-15. Now, to compare that directly to the enrollment, our student enrollment is down 290 students while teaching staff is down 10.5. Student enrollment is down 9%, while teacher staffing is down 3%. We recognize that that's not a one-to-one correlation, and we recognize somebody may be led to ask, why isn't teacher staffing down more dramatically? Why isn't that down 9%? Well, part of the answer is because everything that I just said. Some of that reduction has been used to fund these program enhancements that we've been talking about, more special education service, more support for social emotional needs, full day kindergarten, more teacher support and coaching. but it also is a factor of the way the system is structured. We need to remember that enrollment decreases are spread across 7 locations and 13 grade levels. And so an immediate reduction of 20 students doesn't mean the immediate reduction of 1 teaching position if those 20 students are spread across multiple grade levels in 7 different school settings. If 20 students all left in the same grade level in 1 elementary school in 1 year, that would immediately result in 1 teaching reduction, but that's just not the way demographics tend to work when those reductions do occur. All of that being said, I really quickly will just remind the board and the community that there are several reasons that are impacting this increase this year. Again, we're coming off of 6 years of really reasonable, really low, really responsible budget increases. Additionally, we are at the end of this net reduction in teaching staff. The budgets are lean, the teaching staff is already running lean. At that same time, we are experiencing this impact of the medical benefit increase. We're experiencing the impact of multiple other cost drivers, while small individually, that are coming together to create cost drivers. This year's decisions focus on the classroom, focus on the teacher-student relationship. There's not a single investment decision this year that is not driven either by a state mandate or a need exacerbated by the pandemic, with the exception of those small investments in both swimming and hockey. And finally, those discretionary investments that are so important for this year represent less than 1%, closer to 0.5% of the overall increase. We just thought that with the scope of the increase in general, we could not wipe out what the students need, only to bring down a 5.2% increase down to a 4.7% increase. That did not make sense to us as we finalized this budget. This is simply not the time to reduce existing service to students. This is not the time to be suggesting that we increase class sizes, that we reduce social, emotional, or mental health supports for our students, that we take away extracurricular or co-curricular or arts-related activities. Our students need what we offer now more than ever. We're proud of the product that we present and that we provide to the students and families in Guilford. We know this is a significant increase. We just did not see this as a year to cut. If I may, Mr. Ailes, I will briefly touch on the bonding request. That essentially concludes the presentation of the operational budget. This year's budget request for proposal from the Board of Education also includes a bonding request of $3,885,391 to provide for a number of relatively small projects, perhaps with one exception. This bonding request this year will provide for a complete renovation of the tennis courts at Guilford High School, long overdue. It will provide the most significant investment for a kitchen renovation at Baldwin Middle School, also overdue. It provides for a library renovation at Cox. It provides for the installation of a district-wide pre-K playground at Lakes Elementary School. It's important to note that at Lakes, we host a district-wide pre-K program. It services students from the entire community. And so while Lakes community is raising money to build the 1 through 4 playground, this proposal would provide for the district to provide that district-wide portion of the playground. And this proposal would also provide for the renovation of existing office space in 595 New England Road, what many people will still refer to as the old science wing in the high school parking lot. This renovation would make the office space there habitable, usable, and it would allow us to move from 3 different diverse locations, some space off the back of Leet Elementary School, space at CO North located on New England Road, but most importantly, out of town space where I'm standing tonight on the green in the historic Lathrop House. By moving our central office functions to that currently unused office space on school property, it will open up those other spaces for either storage, maintenance, or school functions, but it also allows Lathrop House here on the green to be returned to the tax rolls. For as long as I'm aware of, the town has let this property to the school district at no charge. And while there's property that is currently unused on school location, and this on the green is being used by us, seems to us like a no-brainer that we allow this to revert back to the town for some other better use, and we take that available space on existing school property. There are also some architectural and engineering fees associated with this, and this would represent the board's bonding request again of $3.8 million. And with that, I will take a breath, and Dr. Balistraci and I are happy to answer questions about the school's operational and bonding capital budget.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. Thank you, Dr. Balistraci.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Dr. Balistraci, did you want to wrap up with the
Yeah.
return on investment? I apologize, I forgot this slide.
No. I will make this short and sweet because we do want to give the public an opportunity. This is just my opportunity to remind our community of the return on investment here. We continue to be one of the top school districts in the state. We score at the top of standardized tests and other evaluations, accountability measures. Our kids are placed in wonderful, high-ranking colleges across the country. You have been to theater arts presentations, athletic state championship competitions, etc. And yet we continue to be in the middle of districts on pupil per spending. So I just would again like to remind the community that this is an investment in our children, and that it is money that we spend very carefully in supporting, again, one of the highest districts in the state. Thank you.
Thank you again, both Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci. At this point, as I had mentioned earlier, before we go into the town presentation by our first selectman, I did want to allow the opportunity for the board to open up the floor to any public questions while we have Dr. Freeman and Dr. Balistraci available. And what I would do is ask if anybody from the public would like to speak, again, name, address, and try to keep your questions brief. And if hopefully we've been in this for 2 years, everyone knows how to use a raise hand button, but if not, put on your camera and wave vigorously and we'll try to find you. Anybody wishing to ask any questions of the Board of Education? And Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci. All right, wow, oh, we do have somebody, okay. I have Deborah's iPad, so.
Hi. Is it
Okay.
okay just to ask a question? This is the first time I'm using this, so.
Absolutely, just for the record, name, address, and your question.
Deborah Demusis, 18 Sugarloaf Road, Guilford, Connecticut. I would like a cost per pupil that we are spending now and what it would be if the budget was approved.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you. So the Connecticut School Finance Project does these assessments every year. Unfortunately, they have not been able to do it in the last 2 years. The pandemic has really made the collection of a number of data more challenging as well. So when I report on 19, I think it's 18-19 data, we were 81st in the state in per pupil spending among 169 districts. I can get that exact spending figure for you in just a moment as we are talking. But I believe it was just at $18,000 per pupil. But I will double check that figure for you as we're talking. I do know, again, that we were right in the middle of state spending.
State?
Can I ask? Is it okay to ask another question now?
Sure,
Or
it's
are
fine,
you-
yes. Yes,
Yes, okay. Yeah, I don't know how the insurance works, but I did work at the high school for 21 years and as a para educator, and I've been retired for 3 years. So in relationship to the cost of the insurance, I know that was always a big issue with negotiations. And I wondered what percent the teachers are paying of their insurance.
I'd want to go back and check, but I believe that the teacher's cost share is approximately 19 or 20%. It's in that ballpark. I would need to check our contracts to get the actual rate for this year and next year. But I know that we have increased it through each negotiations, if not 1% a year. We've increased it at least 1% or 2% through each 3-year negotiation.
Okay, that's like a really big thing. So I know that many people in the private sector are paying a lot more than 19 or 20% as a part of their insurance payment. So that does worry me. Another thing that I've always been really concerned about is when I worked at the high school, we always had one principal, one assistant principal, and we had 2 deans. And then our 2 deans became principals. We're paying for 3 assistant principal salaries at the high school. So are we somewhat top heavy and should be using some of that money towards something else? I mean, why does a school that's decreasing in population need 3 assistant principals at a high school that has, less than 1,200 students probably at this point?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So we're definitely not top heavy statewide when you look at administration. The positions at the high school, we did not increase any administrative positions. What we did was we moved our deans from 10-month positions to 12-month positions. We have the same number of administrators at the high school as we have always had. In fact, district-wide in Guilford, the way that you see our staffing breakout is that we are staffed well, relatively well at the teacher level when compared to other districts across the state, including DERG A and B districts. We are very thin when you look at the administrative staffing. I know you asked a question about the high school, but I will use I'll use the district-wide level and the elementary level. One of the districts that we benchmark ourselves against is Westport. While Westport spends significantly more per student, we tend to compete with them in the standardized test score and in the performance level. At the elementary schools in Westport that are about the same size as Guilford elementary schools, they report class sizes of about 22. I believe the average class size this year is 22. The average class size in Guilford elementary schools is 19. So from a teacher staffing level, we're very similar. We come right in at the same level, in fact, a little bit better when you look at class size. Each elementary school in Westport has 3 full-time administrators assigned to it. There's a full-time principal, a full-time assistant principal, and a full-time special education coordinator. Our elementary schools are staffed with 1 full-time principal, and we have 1 full-time special education coordinator that serves all 4 of our elementary schools. So while our teacher staffing is very comparable to Westport, our administrative staffing is 1.25 compared to 3 at each building level. At the district level, if you look at their administrative staffing, they have administrators in the curricular office for each of the major subject areas. They've got 7 district-wide administrators working in the curriculum office underneath an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction. In Guilford, we have 0. We have an assistant superintendent who works for curriculum and instruction, and she works directly with the coaches and the principals. There is no administrative level beneath the assistant superintendent in the curricular office. So I appreciate the question. We are not top heavy when it comes to staffing. We are in fact lean administratively when compared to other districts around the state, particularly when compared to DERG A and B districts, who are those districts that we perform with.
Well, they have a considerable more amount of money than we do to spend.
Oh, absolutely.
But it also would seem that if we've done this for years, I've been in town for 41 years, and my children were very successful, and Guilford has always been very successful. The classes have always been about 19. They were a little higher, I think, when my children were younger. But to me, it seems like we don't need that. we're doing fine with what we have. And then maybe it will come to another question where, and I'm not sure if this is in the budget, but I had heard that there might be an interest in hiring someone else for the 4 grammar schools as, I guess, a principal to share or to go around. Is that still in the budget?
No. So there was discussion of including an assistant principal position. And again, to your point, and to the slide that I shared, this budget shared with the community tonight includes no increases in administrative staffing. If you are asking whether we're top heavy and whether we should be making reductions to administrative staffing, this budget also includes no cuts at the administrative level.
Right. Another thing is, though, that the 3 deans, or the 2 deans rather, that you said went from not a full year to a full year, that meant that their salary was also increased. And that means that every year we're paying more as a percent for that 12 months. And what are we getting for that 12 months? What are they doing for those 2 months in the summer as assistant principals? What is their value?
They're planning to open the school year. They're building schedules. They're designing the system. They're doing planning for students that need.
That was done before. All of that was done before we made them.
I was simply trying to answer your question. You asked what they do over the summer. I'll also note that over the several years before they increased to 12 months, those deans were working additional summer hours and being paid a per diem rate. So while there was an increase to their salary, it also took away the necessity for timesheets and per diem work that they were doing that needed to be accomplished.
I'd like to be able to, Deborah, thank you for your questions. Appreciate it.
Mhm.
Just want to be able to see if anybody else from the public would like to ask questions of the Board of Education by raising their hand. If I don't see anyone, I will certainly entertain any members of the Board of Finance to ask a question or two. Again, our opportunity will be on Thursday. I did have one quick one while the rest of the board maybe ponders a question if they have any. I just wanted to confirm, you were talking about, Dr. Freeman, the 10.5 FTEs have been reduced over, let's say, since fiscal year 14-15. I just want to confirm, does that factor in the 6.4 increase, or is that before this year's proposed budget investment in those positions?
Thank you. That is before. That's a comparison of 14-15 to 21-22. So the increase that we're suggesting this year would change that calculation for next year.
Okay, so we'd be going to a net 4 drop if we bring in these 6.
If we share that slide again next year, that's correct.
If it moves forward as presented and is approved, yes.
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have no shortage of questions if you can entertain as many as possible.
Well, I will entertain, with all due respect, a couple, because I know you have lots of questions, and I know we'll get plenty of opportunity. We also have the town presentation as well with questions. So if you want to ask a couple, I'll give you, if you don't mind, I'll give you a couple, and we'll go back to the public, and if not, we'll get on to the town presentation. So, Mr. Trotta, go ahead with your questions.
All right, let me throw one out there. I guess this is just kind of some questions about the elephant in the room. We've got a very big increase in medical expenses this year. And I was wondering if Dr. Friedman and even our first selectman, Matt, will later address this, but just talk about what is driving that increase and what kind of things we've been doing to mitigate it. And even going forward and seeing these fluctuations in medical expenses, would the town consider maybe changing the medical benefits sort of in a large way, like they did with the retirement benefits, maybe as new employees come in? Obviously, our current employees are entitled to this benefit package. But I think we should talk about medical. I think it would clarify things for anyone who's watching from the town and even for me to just kind of verbalize the issues with medical.
Mr. Trout, I'm sure we'll talk about it more on Thursday. Dr. Balistraci, I'm willing to start, but the Board of Finance and the Board of Education met, had a specific meeting. Most of the meeting was taken up by a conversation with our insurance consultant from Lindbergh and Ripple, Joe Spurgeon. In a nutshell, the increase is being driven by two factors. It is being driven by our experience over the past several years. And insurance companies very simply look back at what they spent on your group in the last couple of years. And when their expenses are low and when your experience is positive, your rates remain stable or decline. And when they've had to pay out of pocket, when you've had increased usage, then they suggest that those rates increase. That's one part of what's happening. The second part is that while we are self-insured, we do purchase a stop loss policy, and Anthem has changed the way that they provide stop loss pricing for municipal entities across the state. And we lost what had been a favorable cost scheme, and it's now more expensive. I will note again to the slide that I shared earlier, this board has been working on renegotiating teacher contracts. We've changed the type of insurance. We've gone from a point of service contract to a high deductible HSA, health savings account model. And we have increased the share of all of our employees consistently in every one of our negotiation cycles. We've been working to bring the cost down. And for 6 years, we have been trending down. Even with this increase this year, we're not back to where we were in school year 16-17. So I think that we've worked really hard to manage and maintain those costs. We have reached out through our consultant to Anthem. We have asked for all the information that we will need to make a competitive cost comparison. We have told Anthem that we want to see comparative costs for both the stop loss as well as the plan wholesale. And we're currently in conversations about whether or not the medical service needs to be bid publicly to find a more competitive price. The bottom line is all of the other bidders will have access to our most recent experience in the same way that Anthem does. And so while that's the right thing to do, we're not particularly optimistic that it will bring costs down. And Mr. Ailes, Mr. Hoey, Dr. Balistraci, I'm sure that there'll be more talk about this topic on Thursday evening.
I appreciate that answer. You know, there's one thing for clarification though that's bothering me a little bit is, as far as experience, I was just looking at the February medical report, so I may be off on this, but it seemed like we've got a few months to go, but we're somewhere close to what we budgeted and what we spent thus far in our forecast for this year. Is our experience really off the charts for last year, or some kind of 5-year average, or?
If I may, I think there are probably a number of factors. There is a little bit of an unknown, which is a pandemic effect. That there was medical care that was deferred, and in some cases that at a national experience at least led to both elective type surgeries being deferred, and in fact just not being conducted in a lot of certainly our local hospitals, but also folks just not getting even some needed care, fear of entering a hospital setting during a pandemic, which led both to deferred costs and in some cases to more severe conditions than requiring treatment. That is not the whole story here. But that is a piece potentially of what we're looking at as well.
And I just want to be cautious about not trying to speak to this to the same level that Mr. Spurgeon would have spoken to this. And so,
Yes.
Mr. Ailes, I don't know if we want to, again, on Thursday, think about inviting Linda and Mary Jane more into the conversation, but I want to be careful about going too deep into the details.
I couldn't agree more. I was going to say that what Dr. Balistraci just said is just a piece of the puzzle of this medical insurance issue. Mr. Spurgeon did a fantastic job describing all of this to us and going over it. In fact, I was going to entertain our finance director or our first selectman, or even Ms. Trudeau, either finance director for that matter, if they wanted to make any comment regarding this. But I do think that for the state, for the, for time purposes, I do think that it's a discussion that we should definitely take on, Jonathan, regarding Thursday and insurance, and have much more of a discussion over it. And
Yeah,
and be
and
prepared for
I
that.
agree,
So
Mike.
because it has been it has been a big impact on these budgets, and we've talked about it over the forget the last couple months, but the last few years. So
Yep.
I do believe
And
that-
I'm actually very happy with the answer. I also wanted to give Dr. Freeman and Katie, excuse me, Dr. Tracy, a chance to explain that they've actually mitigated the problem over the years by trying to increase the contributions from the teachers. And then I also wanted to let the public know, it's kind of my understanding that the town is interested now in looking at other options, and that they will shop for better prices and forecasts for our insurance. And I wanted that to come out on the table. I don't know the exact details either, but I wanted to have the public get a taste of that.
Mr. Hoey, I did see your hand up. I want to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like Dr. Freeman and Dr. Tracy. Would prefer not to try to get into the nuances of projecting healthcare costs. It's a science far beyond my reach, but we have had the presentation specifically about the methodologies that are used from Joe Spurgeon. So, but to Jonathan's most recent point, collectively, the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen made the decision in consult with our consultant to prepare to go out to bid for stop loss and general insurance coverage beyond Anthem, because Anthem is our third party administrator for our self-insured system. That resulted in Anthem coming back and lowering the prices for our stop loss insurance, which meant that we did not have to take an assumed risk from the lasering that we had been recommended we do for two very distinct high cost cases, which is what was driving the stop loss premiums through the roof. The mere fact that we started the process to go to an RFP resulted in Anthem coming back with reduced rates. So these rates are better than they were when we first met with Joe Spurgeon, and he laid out for the Board of Finance the challenges we had in front of us. So we saw an issue. We engaged our consultant to go to the market. Anthem has made a change. Quite honestly, I'm not sure we had enough time to actually effect a full-blown RFP, but this now allows us to effect a full-blown RFP while having garnered rate reductions.
Thank you for that summary.
So I can go on to another one, Mike, or we could let someone else shoot one out. Or
Well, let me just ask if anybody else from the public, this is the public's opportunity, because we're in the, not so much the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education being in the weeds, but we know a lot about these budgets. I just want to make sure the public has an opportunity. Obviously, if they want to listen on or listen in, that's perfectly fine too. I also know there's not a lot of town officials and staff members on listening on, so just want to make sure the public can. Otherwise, Jonathan, I'll if you want to have one more question, that's fine. Any other Board of Finance member have any questions? Or otherwise, I'll let you take one more, and then we'll get on to the town.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that this is sort of non-discretionary part of the budget. We're obligated to provide the insurance. But my next question really kind of goes into what would be more what I would consider discretionary spending. So I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the FTEs, the 6.24 additional positions that the Board of Education is considering in this budget. And I think it really is going to end up being maybe 5 questions, because there's kind of 5 different distinct areas. But I guess I'll start with one, and that is the 2.4 positions for the mastery diploma teachers at the Guilford High School for a cost of about $125,000. And I still want to ask the school if they might consider models from other schools where they're just absorbing the extra work for these requirements in their current staff, and they're not staffing up to handle these requirements. And then also happened to catch a meeting where the Board of Education even discussed another possible approach where they would give teachers some compensation to existing teachers to handle the extra work for these requirements with some after school sessions with students, I believe, if I heard correctly. So I just wanted to ask if the Board of Education's a tough budget, obviously, and you may want to expand staff to handle these requirements, but would you consider maybe tightening the belt and using existing staff to cover these new requirements from the state?
I'm going to speak from a Board of Education standpoint, and then certainly let Dr. Freeman answer as well. Mr. Todd, as you noted, we discussed this at length at the Board of Education meeting, have had actually multiple meetings in which we asked questions of Dr. Freeman, of our high school principal, Ms. Julia Chaff, really trying to understand what potential approaches might be available to us. Our final decision, I think we determined a couple of things. One, that based on, and again, it's the first year, but based on statistics at the moment, the great majority of students who are participating in the present model at the high school are finishing the junior year half credit course within the semester, and only 18% of those doing it as a kind of a extra project, let's say, are finishing it in that time. So that from a completion standpoint, the approach with a classroom has been far more successful in terms of bringing students to the point of completion. There is a lot about this program that the high school is interested in continuing to think about with the administration. Ms. Chaff has noted a number of times that they're thinking about and talking with students to evaluate how this has gone so far. The Board of Education is really, in fact, expecting a workshop meeting in which we talk about this further. But our final decision to fund this 2.4 was also based on the fact that when we did the math on what it would require to have sufficient number of staff take on additional students, that from a purely a budgetary standpoint, there was not a sufficient reduction in the cost, and there could be a substantial reduction in the quality of the product for students. Dr. Freeman, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I was going to add is that we did the analysis of existing staff on the front end. And I mentioned several times tonight, there have been a number of other years where we came forward and suggested that we're going to be offering a new special educational program in district, and we don't need to bring any new teachers in because we're going to cover it with existing staff. We looked at the staffing at the high school. I know there are other districts that are providing this year and not adding staffing positions because they're avoiding otherwise cutting those staffing positions. Again, I will say at the heels of these past 6 years, after the 10.5 net teacher reductions that we're at, no, we didn't have the capacity at the high school to simply do it with existing staff. Our teachers in this district at this point in time are working above and beyond the call of duty. And to simply say to the high school staff that we're going to layer another unfunded mandate on your existing workload and ask you to carry that now, when looking at the staffing, we couldn't see that capacity, was not an approach that we were going to take. Our design was based on trying to do this well, We're revisiting that design. We will continue to adjust it moving forward, but we think an investment of $125,000 to serve roughly 600 kids annually in these first couple of years, that number will go down a little bit when the reductions start to move through, the smaller classes start to move through the high school. But we're talking about supporting 600 students next year with a new graduation requirement. Seems to us like there needs to be that level of investment to do it right and to do it well.
Okay. I do see a hand up. And so Deborah, I will allow you to have a question. I do want to move on, but I believe the Board of Finance is all set unless I see a hand go up, but and I don't see any more public. So Deborah, if you'd like to ask our last question of the Board of Education, that'd be great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Deborah, you may be on mute.
I got it. I just unclicked it.
Oh,
I'm just extremely curious about what the mandate is. Where do I find it? Where do I see it? And if the state is mandating it, why aren't they providing the funds for it? Or federal or whatever. So those are my questions, I guess. I'm so curious. What is this mandate?
So you-
If I may just say, the question I find most compelling is, why is the state mandating something that they do not put funding behind? It is a question we ask ourselves on the board far too frequently, but I will let Dr. Freeman answer the question more specifically about where to find information on the program.
The requirement comes out of new state legislation. You can find it on the State Department of Education website. It is the mastery-based graduation requirement. It goes into effect in school year for the graduating class of 2023. And Debbie, if you email me directly, I can get you more specific information about how to find the mandate. The mandate, like many, is vague. It says that students are required to complete 1 credit, and the credit needs to be based around a performance or exposition approach to a mastery expectation. That's a lot of jargon. We, again, look at those mandates, and even though they're unfunded, we attempt to address the spirit of the expectation. We designed a program that we're actually excited about. We don't look at mandates and try to figure out the least expensive, cheapest compliance way to check the box and not do it well. So I can help you find it more specifically. If you contact me directly tomorrow, I'll give you a link.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could,
Yes.
on the unfunded mandates, it is a consistent problem with the state legislature. They think they know what's best for all of us, but they don't always provide us with the means to get to where they think we ought to get to. But I will say that Guilford belongs to 2 consortiums, municipal consortiums. One of them is Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. The other is COST, the Small Towns, Council of Small Towns, excuse me. And the legislative platform for all the years that I've been affiliated with CCM has always included among the top priorities is no new unfunded mandates and elimination of as many unfunded mandates as you can. That is a consistent piece of the platform, the legislative platform, every year.
Great.
Mr. Ailes, may I answer?
Sure.
Mr. Musis had a question early on, and I told her I would get the accurate information. Per the school and state finance project, 2019-2020, what they're reporting as a net current expenditure per pupil for Guilford is $18,478. I think I said a little above 18,000. So that doesn't, they do some work in looking at how that breaks down for local spending versus state versus federal. It may not come as a surprise that we don't get a whole lot of state funding in Guilford or federal, but I just want to give you that number.
Great, thank you, Katie, appreciate it. We're going to move on, but I do want to remind everybody who's on, part of the virtual meeting or hearing that there will be public forum at the end. So if there's any comments, we certainly will entertain comments. And if there's a question embedded that was forgotten to be asked, certainly could be added, and I'm sure the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, First Selectman will, look to answer those questions for us on Thursday, but I want to give that opportunity and now move on if we could. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for their questions. At this point, I will, I'm sure, Mr. Ho, you'd probably like to share your screen unless it's
I think Karen is going
who
to
will be
handle
doing
that.
it.
Karen, of course, will handle it.
And I don't think I can allow that unless I'm made host, but if you can all figure it out, that'd be fantastic. But I will hand the floor over to you, Matt, to present the town budget for fiscal year 22-23.
Well, thank you for handing it over to me and to Karen, because without her, this doesn't happen.
That's right.
Mr. Chairman, Board of Finance, and members of the public, it is my pleasure to submit the Board of Selectmen's budget for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2022, ending June 30th of 2023. Hard to believe we're talking about numbers like 2023, but we're here to do that. This proposed budget includes the town operating and capital budgets, as well as the town and school combined debt service budget. I will note that this budget was recommended to the Board of Finance and hopefully to the public intact by a unanimous vote of the Board of Selectmen. I would note that this is the 5th consecutive year that this Board of Selectmen has been together, and in all 5 years, the recommendation to your body has been unanimous. I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to thank my staff, our staff, really, town staff, and particularly Karen, Mary Jane, and Tracy, who have helped prepare this presentation and get us to this point. Additionally, I'd like to thank the department heads, as you did earlier, Mike, for the work in doing this bottoms-up budget and being very introspective when they put these budgets together. And many of those department heads are on this call this evening, including our Human Services Director, Mitch Goldblatt, who is actually teaching a class at UNH tonight. I'm not sure if it's civics or what it is, but he has his entire class paying attention to us. So hopefully we are informative for his students. So I also want to acknowledge that there are a couple of members. I think I saw Sue Renner, Charles Haverda, and maybe Sandy Ruoff on this call as well. And thank you to them for their collaboration in getting us to this point. Pretty simply, what is the mission of town government? Any civics class could come up with a variety of these things, but in my mind's eye, and I think is shared with the Board of Selectmen, our first responsibility is public protection and safety. As such, we need to maintain an infrastructure that allows us to freely access and utilize the roadways and the amenities we have in town and get access to those town services. I also think it's vitally important that as one community that the Board of Selectmen supports the initiatives and the goals of our Board of Education, while we continue to provide quality of life benefits, and at the same time try to assist our business community and hopefully drive down a reliance on residential property taxes. These priorities inform how we approach building the budget, including our budget objectives and key factors. And I think Karen will move to that one. Some of you may have seen some of these before. These look a little familiar. What are we looking to do? Maintain high level of services in the face of increased demand and uncertainty in state funding. This year, however, I am pleased to report that there is a little more certainty than we've had in the past, based on what information I've gotten from the legislative leadership. So the ECS formula is going to remain flat as opposed to the implementation of the gradual reduction for certain communities of wealth, which we are one. And also the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act will be fully funded this year. So there's a little bit of good news on that side. We're also trying to assure that we have appropriate staffing levels and associated support, specifically because of COVID-19 pandemic. We've had the opportunity to talk about that, and you'll see a little bit later where we are intending to use American Rescue Plan funds. The pension, our funding of pensions is essential. We have done a tremendous job of providing our pension committee with the appropriate assets to invest them correctly so that we have unfunded liabilities that are among the best in the state, among our municipal communities. We've also included OPEB funding for the first time. This board, your board, has been very cooperative in helping us establish the other post-employment benefits funding, and we have been able to make those contributions at the recommended levels while adopting a lower discount rate. We have moved the discount rate, the assumed rate of return on our investments, from 6% to 5.75%, and that also puts us among the leading communities in the state of Connecticut and makes it more realistic in terms of what we need to do to continue to make our pension plans viable. If we flip to the next section, one of the most important things that I've been concerned about for years is protecting the tax relief programs that we have established and are cherished by many in our community for the veterans, the elderly, and disabled. The senior tax freeze program, which I think we have a slide on a little bit later, probably I know it impacts over 700 households here in Guilford. We continue to invest in information technology. This is a long neglected area where we did not invest the appropriate amount of funding. We continue to invest there. We continue to have healthy capital project funding within the operating budget. I think as you've heard over the years, we've been trying to move as much to the operating capital as opposed to going out to bonding. And you'll see that we've been relatively consistent here. Once again, the Board of Finance is being presented with a budget from the Board of Selectmen that does not rely on any revenues from unassigned fund balance. Additionally, some of the challenges, the key factors, we continue to see demographic shifts driving increased demand on senior and social services. And you'll see a little later in the presentation, higher program participation in our social services and our senior programs, in particular our senior meal subsidies. As a result of timing, we are now on the backside of the Guilford High School bonding cliff. For years, we had to absorb consistent increases in our debt services cost because they were specifically rated to the high school. We've moved past that hurdle. The SAFER grant, which many of you have heard about over the years, which was a federal program that allowed us to add 8 new firefighters to our staff to provide more than reasonable but equitable response times to the North Guilford community. So that firehouse in North Guilford is staffed 7/24, 365 days a year. But that SAFER grant has now expired, and we are experiencing a loss of $106,000 to cover salaries related to that expansion of the service. Increased health department staffing levels by a half a position. From one position was gone from part-time to full-time. That will be American Rescue Plan funded. So even though we're moving the position to full-time, there's no budget impact here. You heard Dr. Freeman and Dr. Balistracci talk about increased healthcare costs. We're being impacted by those very same variables, and we are anticipating we've been told that we should fund at an anticipated level a 17% increase or an additional $609,000. So let's take a look at the larger picture in terms of the operating budget. The town operating budget is increasing by nearly $1.7 million or 5.34%. The operating capital budget, as I mentioned, was relatively flat. We're actually down about $4,000, which puts the overall operating budget at a 5.15% increase. If we move to the overall picture with debt and total budget, often referred to as the total town budget, that number, because of the debt service drop of $156,000, specifically related to the high school bonding, the overall town budget increase is at 3.53%. And I should mention that that debt service projection includes anticipated issuances later this summer. The Board of Selectmen was presented with the department's bottom-up budget, and obviously that didn't survive the scrutiny of the board. So we made some adjustments. On the capital side, we removed over $1 million, $1.1 million. But as I think you know, in reality, what we did with that capital stuff is we just moved it out on the 5-year curve, the 5-year capital plan. We were able to reduce expenditures in departmental budgets by nearly $250,000, and that came basically across every department in town. To talk a little bit about the increases by major category of the town budget, salaries are accounting for a 4.43% increase. I want to take a minute just to talk about where that's coming from. It's not new staff positions. Those are step increases based on our contract, but they are the contracts, but they are also the result of some negotiations, contract negotiations, in particular with the Guilford Employees Association. We were able to by design compress some of the entry level pay scale steps because they were barely at living wage. And this is an issue that had been identified a couple of years ago. So we compressed some of those scales, and we also added we revised several other of those positions to do a couple of things. Get closer to a living wage for a significant number of our employees, to be able to attract quality employees to replace those who are retiring or moving on to more lucrative positions. Additionally, the salaries were impacted by the minimum wage increases. As you may be familiar, we have a significant number of seasonal employees that are hired. And when you take a seasonal employee who is at $13,000 an hour, $13 an hour, and the $1 increases that the legislature put in the minimum wages, that equates to $1 on 13 is about 7% increase on those staff members. As I mentioned, employee benefits are up. The good news is that 501 is a result of the fact that our pension contributions went down, despite the fact that we had a healthcare increase of over $600,000. Purchase services, big jump here, related specifically to a couple of things that most of us are feeling, right? Utilities, fire hydrants, and water, significant increase, as well as the general challenges to materials in the supply chain, factoring in the rate of inflation. Specifically to the increases in employee benefits, as I just mentioned, the retirement plan contributions overall were down over $100,000, and as I said earlier, a lot of that it goes to the credit of the pension committee for the sound investment decisions they've made. And again, that 101,000 could have been about $361,000 in decreases had we not moved the discount rate from 6 to 5.75%. And I should mention that the movement to that discounted rate to 5.7 was approved by the pension committee, recommended by the pension committee, and our pension financial advisor. Dr. Freeman talked a little bit about the medical benefits. So there you go. There's the town's increase. But I wanted to point out that in 2016, 2017, the total spend for the town and Board of Education on healthcare was $13,200,000, and the projected expenditures for the current fiscal year 21-22 is $11,300,000. So we still have not gotten back to the levels we were at prior to introducing the HSAs to our employees. Unfortunately, the meter has run out on those opportunities to continue to save healthcare expenses. Some of the increases in our operating budget, youth and family services, significant increase on that side. That's related to the COVID caseloads and also the loss of over $45,000 in grant funding that was a 10-year grant program that we have been able to take advantage of. That has expired, so we're now absorbing the balance of those costs. At Park and Recreation, salaries, as I mentioned, part of the Guilford Employees Association contract resulted in not significant, but a number of increases in those in Park and Rec positions. Utilities also plays a part here. With the police department, we're looking at a nominal increase, but the increases are largely in salaries and fuel. Town properties, this is where that water and hydrant comes into play. $124,000 increase alone in the utility costs to provide fire hydrants throughout the town of Guilford. The fire department, I think I mentioned earlier, largely related to the SAFER grant, the loss of the funding on the SAFER grant, in addition to overtime and replacement costs associated with COVID-19. I don't think I need to beat employee benefits to death any further. In terms of reductions to the operations budget, economic development is down a little over 7%. That's a result of us regionalizing the economic development position with Madison and the use of ARPA funds to offset some of the increased costs on that side. So we're sharing costs with Madison, but we are both Madison and Guilford are using American Rescue Plan funds to cover what would have been the increases. Capital, again, just a minor drop, basically flat. Legal is down once again. This is, I think, the second or third year in a row we've been able to drop the legal services. Attorney Barrett is doing a good job of managing the many cases. We have one concern with this account. We did some, we used a couple of reval cycles, the 5-year reval cycles, to anticipate the increased amount of legal expenses related to tax appeals, because as you well know, we have a revaluation coming, which goes into effect with the assessment in October 1 of 2022. And typically we see an increase in tax appeals after the reval goes into place. So we think we're okay, but we may have some challenges there later. Planning and zoning is down largely as a result of a restaffing of that organization. And we have a very interesting opportunity in front of us to reshape the planning as well as the zoning enforcement operation of that department. In terms of the health department, we are utilizing COVID American Rescue Plan funds. So while there is an increase in the number of employees, there is a decrease in the overall cost because of the use of the American Rescue Plan funds. And then debt service once again is dropping the 1.5%. Quickly, and at little over $1 million, $1,070,000 in capital. Lion's share of that falls under vehicles. Police department alone, the replacement and outfit of those vehicles is nearly $250,000. Town properties, we're replacing a 15-year-old vehicle that we can no longer keep on the road. Park and Recreation, a bus to replace one of the senior buses that is no longer serviceable. And in terms of the equipment, that is spread throughout many of the departments. As I mentioned earlier, the trend in capital funding had been on the upswing for the past 3 or 4 years, but in consideration of the fact that we're asking for an over 5% increase in the operating budget, we decided to keep this relatively flat. The next slide is what I like to refer to as Mary Jane's favorite slide. She's been showing this slide for a number of years as we look forward to the debt cliff, and we are finally on the backside of that cliff, and that represents the $150,000 in decreased spending because of the maturity of our payment schedule related to the Guilford High School, the new Guilford High School. And again, I'll mention once again that these projections include the issuance of bond issues later this summer. Just a quick look, reminder, The debt service falls basically, the lion's share of it belongs to Guilford High School. That will continue to drop over time, as will both the school and the town side. And you can see that, collectively, it's split out relatively evenly amongst those three buckets. I mentioned earlier that we're going to use, we're projecting to use some American Rescue Plan funds. On the salary side, you can see additional help in the town clerk's office for absentee ballot workers is anticipated. Overtime for absentee ballot assistants as well. Part-time assistant in the building officials, the building department. Additional costs for full-time EDC coordinators. I mentioned earlier that showed that's why we had an offset or a decrease on that line item. I mentioned fire department replacement salaries due to COVID. That's covered here. Communications overtime as well, COVID related. Additional assistance in the health department, COVID related. Additional programs and assistance in youth and family services, also COVID related. Some other operating expenses. We're looking at $33,000 for senior meal subsidy. COVID has dramatically impacted the revenue stream. For a number of years, we relied on the breakfast 5 days a week to offset some of the costs associated with providing senior lunches. That revenue dried up and disappeared. So we need to subsidize, add to the subsidy for the senior meal program. And again, these are all Department of Treasury approved expenditures or buckets to areas that we can spend the money on. Additionally, we are moving some capital projects that otherwise we would have put out into future years or bonded. New elevator at the community center, police department roof replacement, an emergency generator at 32 Church Street, and the rebuilding of the Adams tennis courts, and the public works sweeper. As you can see, these are all items that we would traditionally bond for, but given the final rule from Treasury, where American Rescue Plans up to a $10 million level can be used for general government expenses, save for reducing a mill rate or paying down pension obligations or debt service obligations. The other side of the ledger is the operating revenue. First off, interest income barely is going to meet $550,000 this year. We're optimistic in one sense that the Fed is going to be raising the interest rate, but that's going to hurt us in a lot of other areas. But at this point, we're still projecting $50,000 in interest income. I remember a day when we used to earn $500,000 to $600,000 in interest income, but of course we were all paying much more inflated interest rates on our credit cards, our mortgages, and our car loans when those days were around. Building permits we continue to see a surge in building activity. COVID obviously was a tremendous boom for the construction industry and the carpentry industry. Town clerk's office, most of that is related to conveyance fees. As you see, as I mentioned earlier, we are proposing that we no longer use the $50,000 of fund balance that was in the operating budget last year. And there's some modest increases in the other local category. I mentioned earlier that state grants are healthier, and that's as a result of some commitments I received from legislative leadership that we're comfortable using those numbers, despite the fact that the legislature hasn't officially enacted the budget. We're going largely on the biennial budget, which was passed last year, but in particular, the municipal revenue services funding, I have been given assurances will be realized. Okay. As I think was mentioned earlier by Dr. Balistraci, there is good news after, if you want to consider 5% budget increase is bad news, and that is that we've had substantial grand list growth. The net taxable grand list grew by about 2.23%, and once we make the necessary budget adjustments for tax assistance programs, senior freeze programs, veterans and the blind and disabled exemptions, the net budgetary adjustment was almost $2 million in revenue that would come in over and above what we collected last year prior to us enacting any additional expenditures or taxes. So that's significant in terms of its ability to minimize the increases on the operating side. As you'll see a little bit later, it takes a 5% budgetary increase down under 2% in terms of a tax increase. This is more educational than anything. We are still primarily a residential real estate based tax community. 90% of real estate is residential, which equates to 78% of our total grand list. Motor vehicles jumped this year, and it's quick, slight warning to everybody. The cost of not the cost, but the valuation on used vehicles went up dramatically. Anybody who's tried to buy a used car probably has had that same experience. So back to the Board of Selectmen's estimated state grant revenues. The one thing I want to highlight here, and was mentioned earlier, the funding from the state for our Board of Education in terms of the education cost sharing grant is remaining flat, despite the fact that the legislature had enacted a sliding scale to start to diminish the funding for the wealthier communities. But that has been forestalled, at least for this year. So what I want to point out is that education cost sharing grant represents 2.7% of the total Board of Education budget. When some of us were sitting around putting the budgets together 10 years ago, the funding from the state for education accounted for nearly 6% of the Board of Education's budget. Had the current budget that we're proposing, Board of Education budget that we're proposing, been funded at a 6% level, that would mean an additional $2,125,000 in revenue from the state. And by the way, we were at around 3 to 3.5 million back in those days. So just in terms of what that impact is it's substantial. And unfortunately, I think we're going to need to prepare ourselves for eventual decline in the revenues that we currently get. Okay, this is similar to what Dr. Balistraci says. Talked a little bit about what is the investment, what are we investing in, and this is I apologize for a little bit of a civics lesson here, but this is always good for me to refresh my memory of the breadth of services that we offer in our community from the town government. Our fire department, clearly, I think most people know they respond to the emergencies, both health and fire. I want to apologize for the calls for service calendar year graph. That scale is really, really not appropriate. If the numbers only, the scale looks like it's a bigger differential year over year, but this year only represents a 1.8% drop in the calls for service over 2020 versus the most recent year of 2021. But the 2021 numbers are up 2.4% over 2019. So we continue to rely on our emergency service responders. And the average response time has continued to trend in the right direction. It has leveled off. Unfortunately, North Guilford still doesn't have quite the response times that the lower half of the town does. That's largely related to the amount of geography and additionally a number of back-to-back calls that have been experienced in that portion of town. Next up would be our police department. We're fortunate that both our police department is accredited both CALEA and POST, and those are accrediting agencies. And I think some of you may, here's one of those unfunded mandates in the police liability reform bill that was passed 2 years ago. There were some requirements for communities to become CALEA certified. Good news is we've been CALEA certified for 15 or 20 years. So we are avoiding the costs associated with becoming CALIA certified, and those are pretty significant. As you can see, patrol checks and cases continue to be substantial. But the next page goes into a little more detail about that police accountability bill and the unfunded mandates. So this was one of those areas where we are absorbing the cost for things like additional electronics and communication, more service contracts, police medical for mental health wellness checks, which are probably a pretty good thing to do, but no funding came with the requirement. And then there are additional training and salary requirements put upon every municipal police force in the state. At Public Works, they maintain one of the largest landmass areas for a municipality in the state of Connecticut, 49 square miles, 186 miles of road. And they do all these things here in addition to vehicle maintenance for all town and Board of Ed departments. Our engineering department, most folks don't have an idea what they do, but here's what they do. Road excavation permits, flood hazard permits. They manage the MS4 and industrial stormwater permitting, which is receiving a significant amount of oversight by the state of Connecticut and DEP. In this past year, we've had a couple of major infrastructure projects completed. The Sawmill Road Bridge project was done. The Sachem's Head pedestrian bridge replacement was finished. And just prior to the start of the school year, the Adams School parking lot expansion and circulation improvements were made. And you can see several of the other projects that are underway at this point. At Park and Recreation, COVID proved very profitable for our beaches. Our beach passes went up significantly. But more importantly, take a look at that. Over 1,000 youth camp participants over the summer. Fortunately, we were able to welcome back the summer concert and fireworks. Again, the demand for senior meals has increased 12% over last year. And that's why those subsidies needed to be increased. A couple other things that I'm really proud of what Park and Recreation did was provided weekly drive-through lunches for seniors during COVID, but also we collectively put together a program to do shopping for seniors when going out during COVID was dangerous for that population. Okay, at the library, these are amazing numbers. What I'm most proud of is Rob McCool was committed to keeping the library open because of the reliance that so many members of our community have on the library. They average over 400 patron visits a day. That's phenomenal. Digital circulation continues to increase, much higher than pre-pandemic levels. And then they host, they provide an extensive amount of technical support, particularly for seniors, as they continue to deal with the challenges of new technologies. Youth and Family Services. They continue to see, as I mentioned earlier, significant increases in their caseloads. If we move, Karen, move to the next page. These are the numbers. Through 7 months in 2022 fiscal year, 2,150 appointments. That projects out to 3,686, which blows away any of the numbers we've had over the previous years. And that's an 82% increase in appointments over pre-pandemic days of 2019. They are responding to the needs of our youth during these challenging times. Our town clerk, you can see the numbers, significant increases in a variety of areas. But this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. In the assessor's office, they manage over 20 tax assistance programs. Again, okay, I was a little short. It's 725 elderly tax relief accounts that are benefiting the seniors on modest incomes. In the health department, this is one area where I can't say enough about the effort of Sonia Marino and her team in terms of responding to their day-to-day business. They're projecting now, this projects to 674 permits and applications, which would be a 32% increase over 2019. but more importantly, what they've been doing is responding to COVID-19. And in 2020, at the end of 2020, we had 624 COVID cases. And each of those cases required contact tracing by the health department. By the end of December 2021, we had 2,148, almost 2,150 cases. So literally 1,500 cases that they had to provide contact tracing for. Just an outstanding job. In addition to the support and advice and counsel they gave to countless department heads as well as the Board of Education. Our social service agency provides assistance through 40 different programs, state and federal programs, helping those in need forage through the bureaucratic morass of applying for many of these programs. There were 6 new programs added in 2021-22, including a seniors farmer market nutrition program. As you can see on this slide, those who are being served are among the most needy in our community, and we continue to see an increase in the need in those services. On the economic development side, we continue to try to support our businesses. We have recently instituted a grant program for Guilford businesses impacted by COVID to enhance storefronts and a significant effort on business retention and expansion is underway in conjunction with the folks at excuse me, drawing a blank here, the Shoreline Chamber of Commerce. So that's where the money goes, and that's the services that we get for them. So just to recap, the Board of Selectmen reduced the capital budget by $1.1 million while maintaining appropriate levels. We increase in salaries is 4.43%, including the loss of SAFER grant funding and contractual obligations. And the state funding estimates are based on the biennial budget and the assurances from legislative leadership that we're going to be whole with the numbers that we projected here. So old sales habits die hard. You start a presentation and telling what you're going to talk about. You end the presentation with the same slide or something similar to it. And you see these things: public protection, maintain infrastructure, town services, quality of life, Board of Education, and then support business through economic development and tourism. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation. And just want to remind folks that the annual budget meeting is on April 5th, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. Be at the community center. It'll be live in person for full attendance.
First Selectman Hoey, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. It's kind of hard to believe if anybody has any questions after that, but I'm sure there will be. By, if not the public, members of the Board of Finance, as Mr. Trotta laughs. So first and foremost, any questions by anybody from the public, not a Board of Finance member right now, for First Selectman Hoey and the town budget, which would actually be the town and debt service budget both together. And again, I would just indicate, raise your hand, and I think it'll pop right up on my screen and I'll unmute you. Anybody from the public? Okay, I don't see anybody yet. Therefore, I will open it up to Board of Finance members if they have a question for Mr. Hoey. Mr. Trotta, your question.
So great presentation as usual from our first selectman. And I think I wanted to point out, it's probably a very rough number, but I think the increase in the medical costs is about 1/3 of the increase or so. So that's
you're right, John. That's about right.
And that's non-discretionary, and that's making it a tough budget season. So that should be said. I guess I got a question about the Youth and Family Services full-time salaries line. I see an increase of 70,000, which I think is the latest. And I was curious, is that 70,000 not including this part-time person to a full-time person? What is driving that increase on that line? Do you know? I
Mary
saw it
Jane
in
or
the
Lynn, you
latest.
want to take it?
it's in
Yeah,
the
I'll take
latest
it.
paper.
I'll take it. So
Go ahead, Lynn.
just as a little background, our normal caseload with part-time and full-time clinicians is 50 to 55. We just hit 100. There is no way that we can support that with part-time people. So we, with ARPA money, converted those part-time positions into full-time positions. So that change is funded by ARPA federal monies. I'd also like to point out that our revenue goal for was 120,000 last year. And we brought in 178,000 because of the increased caseload. As of last week, the end of February, we just hit 100% revenue projection. We just brought in our 100% of our revenues. So between that and the ARPA monies, we're fully prepared to cover the cost of those part-time positions going to full-time.
I think I didn't articulate the question well. I didn't expect to see the large increase in the budget because I thought it was covered by ARPA.
Mary Jane?
Lynn, you might want to talk about the loss of revenue due to your grants.
Right. So yeah, that's good point. So we had a Drug-Free Communities grant for 10 years. And one of the only paid position was around $45,000 covered by that federal grant. That 10-year period ended at the end of September this past year. So that is a cost that we had to absorb since we didn't eliminate the coalition. That work still needs to be done for substance abuse prevention in our youth.
Okay, I think that.
Yeah,
There.
I was just going to say, I believe that was a requirement of the grant that we continue that work as well.
That's correct. You have to have sustainability in order to get that money every year for 10 years.
Okay, so that definitely explains there's a 70,000 increase. So that's 45,000 where we just don't have the grant money anymore to pay those salaries at 45. So that leaves, I guess, just about another 25 that I was curious about. Some of those are just probably part of the regular increases, salary increases, I'm sure.
Yep.
And it still seemed a little high.
No, it's not. Well, the contractual obligations this year were a little different because as our first selectman explained, that there was research done on salaries and some of those salary steps were increased. So that would account for some of that.
Okay, and then I guess a final question on that line item is that, do you see the need for this as driven by COVID or the pandemic, and that it is really temporary, and maybe going to full-time is really going to lock us into these positions, as opposed to trying to stick in with part-time and realizing that maybe this is temporary?
Well, I think I've answered this before. That I wouldn't want to say to a parent whose kid is suicidal that I don't have the staffing to take care of that child, or to look at the isolation and the depression and the anxiety that these kids are facing. I don't know when this will be over. COVID is not anywhere near over. These kids will be suffering from PTSD for a long time. We'll evaluate every year to see if the full-time positions are still necessary. But we're one of the few places on the shoreline that doesn't have a waiting list. We are taking every child.
Lynn, thank you for making the point that I was hoping to make, which, Jonathan, for every position that we have added that is directly related to COVID, we have stipulated and been very clear that these are positions that will be reevaluated once we are comfortable and we see that we're on the backside of the COVID pandemic. Mental health is one of those areas where it's going to be very hard to determine when we are over that hump. All right, we very well may see in the health department an easier path to determining, well, we don't need all those resources anymore. So in particular, in Lynn's case and Youth and Family Services, that may be more challenging, but Lynn has committed to do that exercise at the appropriate time, that we will re-justify those positions at the right time. And by the way, we have 4 years of expenditures. We have through the December of 2026 to expend these funds. And at that point, that would be the last, that budget season, which would take place in 2025, right? We would have to make that decision as to whether or not we kept those positions if warranted.
Okay,
I
and
would
then-
love,
yeah.
John, I would love nothing better than to say that, 40 kids on our caseload don't need the services. But these kids are coming in with a lot of issues, and it's troubling.
Well, just to clarify, I'd like to see the positions be there for the kids. My real question was just, should they be part-time positions because maybe this is a temporary situation, or, should you go to full-time because you expect it to be a long-term demand?
I think it's going to be long-term, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4. 3 weeks ago, I thought we'd have a little bit of breathing room. We went down to 85. We were very excited. And last week we hit 100. And it's not stopping. We get requests for services, at least 2 to 3 every single day.
Okay. I got a couple more, Matt, but if you want to give
Sure.
someone else a shot,
Sure.
Let me,
should I just keep going?
hold on 1 second. I just want to, as I always do, I want to open it back up to anybody else who has any questions. Anybody else on the Board of Finance or public? I will have one, but it'll be, Jonathan, I'll let you go first, and then I'm going to throw one in there too. And then maybe, Jonathan, assuming no one else has any questions, obviously the Board of Finance will have their opportunity, as I keep saying, on Thursday night.
Okay.
Why don't you ask one more, and then I'll throw one in, then I'll.
Yeah, I think this one is not as long a
right.
topic. I was curious about one of the capital, operating capital line items for the police vehicles. It looked like it was going up about 30%. So I kind of assumed, okay, we're probably just buying some more vehicles, but I just wanted to clarify. And then I also noticed that, and I hope I got this right. I was looking at the latest sheets, but also looked like we spent less than expected in 2021. So maybe we didn't get as many vehicles as we wanted last year. So we're going to buy more vehicles this year. But it was operating capital police vehicles and a $56,000 jump. Like a 30%.
That's one more car. By the time you get done,
One more car?
outfitting the uplift on a car. It's not just buying the car. It's the uplift on all the equipment and the cages and all the bells, whistles that we all used to love when we saw emergency vehicles driving by when we were kids. But these are expensive vehicles.
Okay, that makes sense to me. But I was also wondering too, if we were planning on buying maybe 3 vehicles last year and we only got 2 of them, it looked like we budgeted 186,000 or so, but only spent 122,000.
Mary Jane will have to answer that.
Could be
Yeah,
a 2-date.
I have
Maybe it's
everything
too
up you can possibly imagine for the 23 budget, but I don't.
Oh, no problem.
I can get to that answer for Thursday. Unless the chief is on, that might be able to have a quicker answer than me looking it up. I'm sure.
It makes sense to me. I mean, if the vehicles are old and they need to be replaced, we usually do that on a schedule and do it pretty smart, right? So
Correct. And
Yeah.
and with all of our capital, we're not looking at it year over year. We're looking at it need for this year versus need for the next year. So we don't say, gee, the police have 120,000 this year, you're only going to get 120,000 next year. That's not how we do capital. It's based on specific need for specific items.
I do.
Right.
I
I
do
want
see
to,
the chief is on, so.
yeah, I want to add, I think Butch, you probably can handle this, but I think there's another vehicle in there other than general squad cars, right?
Yeah, for this year's budget, there is a vehicle that is a non-marked vehicle. We have vehicles in the Detective Bureau, which are we keep for much longer. They're older cars, and we try to get those into the rotation at some point. And this would be the year that we would be looking to get one more of those vehicles replaced, and then move the vehicle from the detective bureau or the unmarked area. And that vehicle many times can get repurposed to another town agency as well. So it gets another life.
Okay, thank you, Chief Warren.
I'd like to say there's a vehicle schedule of replacements every year. When a vehicle reaches, I think it's 100,000 miles, it's cycled out, it's used in another department. So there's a constant replacement of vehicles on the road. So it's not a surprise.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. And as the chief will probably tell me, it's not the miles on these vehicles. It's the
Yeah.
runtime on the engine, because they do an awful lot of idling. So it's a combination. That's the same thing with some of the fire vehicles. So.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate the comments. Matt, I just wanted to ask you, I wanted to just indicate that in the presentation with the ARPA funding, that slide is very helpful. I think it tells us a lot where there is funding that is coming federally to us that we're utilizing. I was thinking this might be a good time to just maybe remind the public about not so much what we're spending on now, but what the amount is and the amount of time we have to spend it. And I mean, it took a while to figure out what the quote unquote definition was, right? What the buckets were and how you could define and identify what could be used there. And so now we're starting to do that. Maybe a recap wouldn't be a bad idea for the amount of money that the town of Guilford's getting and how we're, not necessarily how we're going to use it, because I know that's going to be a constant process, but again, the amount and over what period of time.
Good. Mike, thanks for that question. Guilford has been allocated about $6.5 million through the American Rescue Plan. We received the first tranche or payment, if you would, of $3.25 million last year. Mary Jane, you can correct me if I'm off by a decimal, a digit or two. But the final rule came out, and the final rule was had some dramatic changes in it, because the original rule had very distinct categories where you could spend it in, and it was widely open to interpretation as to what fit. And I'll give you a perfect example. One of the eligible classifications was parks enhancements, to encourage folks or to accommodate folks impacted by COVID who want to get outdoors and do things, right? There's a wide array of opinions on what that actually meant. And we had, and you had taken a liberal interpretation as well when we made a presentation to you guys in the fall about how to spend some of the early funds. And you guys were very gracious to approve what the Board of Selectmen had approved. In terms of how we're going to this, I think based on what you've already approved, you and the Board of Selectmen have already approved for usage, and the projections that we just talked about for covering salaries for the next couple of years, and the numbers that you see in that presentation today. I think Mary Jane was estimating we're somewhere around halfway through that $6.5 million allocation, which means we still have money sitting on the sidelines. But the good news, as I mentioned earlier, was the final rule removed most of those restrictions if you up for general governmental purposes up to $10 million. Above $10 million, you would, anything you spend above $10 million, you would have to conform to the strict rules of engagement and what you can spend it on. But as I mentioned earlier, it can be for general government purposes. It cannot be used to offset mill rate or budget increases. It cannot be used to offset debt service payments, and it cannot be used to offset pension funds. Those are the only three criteria left on the use of those first $10 million of funds. So we're at 6.5. We get to do largely what we want to do with those funds, as long as they're consistent with traditional governmental practices and expenditures. But we're still committed to COVID impacts, as you've seen from the presentation here tonight. I will also, just so you know, I am currently very close to finalizing an arrangement with the Guilford Foundation to put together a program to distribute funds to nonprofits. And it is my anticipation, I'll probably be coming to the Board of Selectmen and a Board of Finance, that we allocate somewhere between 500,000 and $1 million over the next 3.5 years, whatever it is, 4 years really, to set up a reserve account or funds where they can apply for relief related to COVID-19 impacts. So we're relatively close to putting that program in place. We will be hiring a consultant to manage that. One of the things I want to be very clear about is the Board of Selectmen does not want to be in the business of picking winners and losers relative to that. So this will be a program that is managed on our behalf through the Guilford Foundation. There might be more than you asked about, but
No, that was perfect. Thank you. It was really a reminder of the 6.1 over a couple of years. And there was also, Matt, just to confirm, there was also, was the Board of Selectmen going to appoint still a committee of some sort to evaluate the funding? Is that something that's still happening? It is.
that will be happening. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I have the arrangement in place with the Guilford Foundation and the Guilford and work the process through for them to hire the outside consultant. But I am going to put that committee together to inform and consult with the consultant and the Guilford Foundation. So I want to have some independent representation there as well.
Great, thank you.
As I'm looking at my screen, I see at least one volunteer that who's still going to get tapped. Yeah, don't look over your shoulder, Bob.
So before it's getting to that point where I think we're all starting to get a little bit weary. We probably all had long days. I know I've had a long day. And listening to me drone on regarding a recap, and then the rest of it, we'll put the rest of you to sleep. Does anybody have any other questions for the first selectman? I will entertain one more. Is there anybody else in the Board of Finance? And one last shot, if anyone from the public would like to ask.
We use a different term.
Yeah, that was bad, wasn't it? One last attempt, one last chance, opportunity.
I'm just kidding.
Whatever word you want to use. Jonathan, go ahead. You finish it off. Go ahead.
I just maybe leave off with a comment, and me and First Selectman have talked about this a little in the past, but I still think the ruling from District Judge, Federal Judge Douglas R. Cole still stands, and he made a ruling that the tax mandate in the American Rescue Plan Act, which seems to tie the relief fund to a state's authority to reduce tax, exceeds the Congress's authority under the spending clause. So he made a permanent injunction against the Treasurer of the United States, the Treasury Secretary, and said that she couldn't enforce that part of the mandate. So I know 13 other states also filed against, but I don't have those rulings in front of me.
And Connecticut did not apply. And Jonathan, there is no one in the state that is adhering to that guidance. And I believe that decision was appealed, wasn't it?
To my knowledge, no, but you may know. I sent you the ruling. I remember we had a conversation about it months ago.
Yep.
Okay, so we will, at this point, close the questioning. We've heard both presentations from the Board of Education and from the town. As I have done the last few years I've been in this position, I will go ahead and recap what we've heard as succinctly as possible, and then open it up to public forum for anybody who'd like to make a comment regarding the budgets that were presented. And then I will close with a couple of statements, or actually just closing logistics. So I will start with the expenditure budget. The Board of Education operating budget has been a request of $65,629,734, which is an increase over last year's budget of 5.18%. On the town operating budget, which will include capital in this particular number. The request is for $34,018,909, and that is representative of a 5.15% increase. Debt service. The request is $264,901. That is a decrease of 1.50%. Commonly, the town operating, well, you've heard tonight, operating and debt combines the town budget. That is actually a 3.53%. And our first selectman did have that on the slide and showed us that. When you combine all of those budgets together in terms of increase, it represents a 4.51% increase in the budgets that have been presented. Revenue side. On the revenue side, non-tax revenue is equal to a request, well, not a request, but a revenue number of $6,969,507. It's not very clear in my spreadsheet, but that appears to, based on basic math, be about a 12.5% increase over last year's non-tax revenue. So what that means is we, as a town, for property taxes, need to come up with $102,944,037. That is representative of about it's a 4.01% increase over last year. So I think I've covered both expenditure and revenue. Now, what does that look like with the mill rate calculations? So taking that 102,944,037, our prior year mill rate is at 32.62. And based on the grand list, which the number is in the 3 billion range, but it is 2.23% increase. The projected mill rate, if approved as presented with no changes to expenditure revenue, would be 33.24, which represents a 1.91% increase in the mill rate / tax rate. Bonding. I would be remiss because I think every year I skip over it and then someone says, hey, what about bonding? Yes, there is a bonding request. And it is a bond estimate or request from ultimately the Board of Education on a number of projects that we've heard about from Dr. Freeman that would total $3,885,391 for, and I won't go through the specific numbers, but it would be for the Guilford High School replacement tennis courts, Baldwin Middle School kitchen renovations, Cox Library renovations, Guilford Lakes District Playground, 595 New England, which is the renovations into offices of the old science wing, as we have been calling it for years, and design of future projects so we can get to these numbers more accurately than just stabbing in the dark, as we say. So that is a recap of where we stand, and we're going into our workshop on Thursday evening. Before I just have a couple last comments, that is the recap. I would entertain our second agenda line item. We've been on one for the entire time, but our second one, which is public forum, which would be limited to 3 minutes on input related to the 22-23 fiscal year budgets as presented. Anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum? I'll give it a second in case somebody can't find the raise hand sign. I know that's happened to me before. That's why I'm doing that. Matt, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. Something I
do.
wanted to add, which I'm, Mary Jane, thank you for reminding me. At the Board of Selectmen meeting on Monday, I guess that was yesterday. Yeah. Yesterday, we approved forwarding to the Board of Finance a refunding of the land acquisition bond program. We unanimously recommended out that we go to the voters for a bond question of $10 million. As many of you may recall, back in, I think 22 years ago, back in 2000, the community understanding the value of acquiring open space and having funds available to do so on short notice, approved the $5 million bond allocation to purchase it. We still have well, I'm not sure how much we got left in that, Mary Jane, but $150,000 left, maybe a little bit more. And the Land Acquisition Commission has a number of targeted properties that may be coming available to us soon. So we ask that the Board of Finance add that question to the referendum, and the amount is 10 million. Just briefly, the Land Acquisition Commission came to the Board of Selectmen, and there was some concern over the original ask, which was 15 million, and we pared that back to 10. So we'll have language for your review at some point. Mary Jane, I know you're working with bond counsel on that now, right?
Great. Thank you for that. And I know I did read about that fairly recently in our local Guilford Courier. So be looking forward to seeing the writing on that for the from the bond counsel for the writing of the resolution. Okay. Final comments. I didn't see any public forum, so we'll just move on to close the meeting. Before we do adjourn, I just wanted to provide a last reminder that the budget workshop #1 will be held virtually on Thursday night, March 10th. That's in 2 nights from now at 7:30. It will be by Zoom as it is tonight. Public forum will be on the agenda before and after the workshop.
Mike, is that March 9th or 10th? I apologize. I just noticed that
March
is the
10th.
9th.
Did I say March 10th?
I think you said March 10th, but I thought it was on March 9th, Thursday.
March 10th is Thursday,
Oh,
right?
see?
Hey, listen, I'm not I get dates wrong all the time, so thank you for
Yes, I
clarifying.
apologize.
Okay, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
Whew. I got worried there for a
Nope,
second.
I
I
haven't
gave the
missed
wrong
it.
date.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, no problem. Thursday, March 10th. We will have public forum before and after. So prior to starting the questions and deliberations for regarding the budgets, there will be public forum before. And then again, we'll ask for it after for any final comments. Should the Board of Finance decide not to vote on the budget to move forward to the town referendum on Thursday night, it could be due to any number of circumstances. One year it was weather. I don't forecast any weather, at least on Thursday night. I foresee it, I think on Thursday morning maybe, but regardless, if for any reason we can't do Thursday night or we don't come to a decision, there will be what's considered workshop #2, and that would be on Monday night, March 14th. And that would also be at 7:30, and we will also do that virtually. If we come to a conclusion and a decision on the budget to move forward, we will not have that meeting. So at this particular moment, I guess I will say thank you, everyone, for sticking around. We have quite a few of the people that started this meeting are ending the meeting and made it all the way through. So very much appreciate all of you being a part of this. And for those that are viewing, whether it's going to be on, I guess, on GCTV or on TV, thank you for making it through basically 2.5 hours, because we're just going to be about 10 o'clock, which is right on target where I was hoping we would be at this point. So Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci, Mr. Hoey, thank you very much for your presentations. Thank you for everybody for your questions.
Thank you.
And we will see you all Thursday night. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you in a couple nights.
Thank you all.
Very much.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.